The storm came in from the Pacific like a living wall. By dusk, the harbor town had already vanished behind rain so dense it flattened distance and erased color. Waves pounded the black rocks below the cliffs with a force that rattled windows 3 streets inland. Every streetlight along the waterfront glowed through the weather in blurred halos, pale and uncertain, as though even electricity had lost conviction. Officer Ethan Cole drove slowly through it all, with both hands steady on the wheel. The patrol SUV shuddered whenever gusts hit broadside. Wipers fought a losing battle across the windshield. Beside him, K9 Shadow sat rigid and silent in the rear transport opening, dark ears forward, amber eyes fixed on the moving shapes outside. He did not whine. He did not pace. He watched. That was Shadow's way. Every storm, every alley, every doorway, every human pause that lasted half a second too long, he watched it all with disciplined patience. Dispatch crackled through the radio. Unit 12, report of forced entry at the old maritime record station on Breakwater Road. Possible transients or vandalism. Neighbor called in broken glass and flashlight movement inside. Ethan pressed the mic. Unit 12 responding. The station sat at the far end of the harbor. Past the cannery skeletons and derelict warehouses, the town kept pretending would someday become something profitable again. The building had been abandoned for years, a squat concrete structure once used to store charts, shipping manifests, maintenance reports, and archived coastal records no one claimed to care about anymore. Most locals barely noticed it now. Ethan did. His father had worked one of his last cases out of that building. He had not thought about that detail in years, not directly, not in a way that let memory settle and stay. He had learned long ago that some memories behaved like live wires. Best not to touch them unless you had to. Lightning flashed somewhere over open water, bleaching the world white for an instant. The station emerged at the end of the road, dark against the cliff base, one side window shattered inward. A loose metal sign clanged against its chain in the wind. Ethan parked at an angle, killing the headlights but leaving the engine idling. He turned and met Shadow's gaze through the partition opening. Search ready. Shadow tensed at once, not excited, not frantic, simply aligned. Ethan stepped into the storm, boots splashing through water running along the cracked pavement. Cold rain hit his face hard enough to sting. He circled the front of the SUV, hand on his flashlight, shoulder radio hissing faintly. When he opened Shadow's door, the shepherd jumped down with practiced precision and immediately began working scent and sound, nose high for a second, then low, then sweeping. Broken glass glittered at the station entrance. The front lock plate had been pried loose. Ethan crouched, touched the splintered wood, and felt fresh fibers slick with rain. Recent. Very recent. Shadow. Easy. They entered on a slow stack, man and dog moving as one shape through the dark. The beam of Ethan's flashlight crossed overturned metal carts, mold-stained boxes, sagging shelves, old maritime maps curled in their tubes. Rain tapped at broken panes. Somewhere deeper inside, water dripped with maddening regularity. Shadow advanced one step ahead, body low and controlled, not pulling, not hesitating. His paws made almost no sound on the dusty concrete floor. The first room had been rifled through, but not in the sloppy way of teenagers or addicts scavenging copper wire. Cabinets had been opened selectively, file drawers pulled halfway and abandoned, 3 shelving units untouched, one shelf at the far wall completely stripped. Ethan's light settled there and stayed. Not random. A surge of instinct tightened through him, cold and immediate. Whoever had come here tonight had known what they wanted. The storm wasn't opportunity. It was cover. Shadow stopped, nostrils flaring toward the open records room. His ears sharpened. Then he shifted left, toward a narrow office beyond the stripped shelf. Ethan followed. Inside the office, a desk lay on its side. Paper was scattered across the floor in wet clumps where rain had found a leak in the roof. An old green banker's lamp had shattered. The safe at the back wall stood open, but not empty. Someone had gone through it and left behind items that didn't matter to them. His flashlight moved over ledgers stamped with dates from nearly 20 years ago. One volume had fallen open across the floorboards, its spine cracked, pages swollen. Ethan bent and lifted it carefully. Harbor Incident Evidence Transfer Log, faded black type. Midway through, something metallic slid loose from the hollow cut inside the back cover and struck the floor with a sharp brass note. Shadow's head snapped toward it. Ethan froze. He lowered the light. Lying on the floor was a brass access token, circular and heavy, etched with a Navy inventory code and a number sequence around the rim, salt-stained, old, intentionally hidden. For a moment the storm seemed to recede. The room narrowed around the object in the light. He knew that code family. Not because he had served there, not because it had been part of his own training, because his father had once shown him a nearly identical token when Ethan was 12 years old, holding it up over the kitchen table and saying, "Sometimes what opens a door is not supposed to look important." Back then, Ethan had thought it was a joke, another one of his father's half-serious lessons wrapped in a riddle. His father had died 3 months later. Everyone in town had accepted the explanation. Harbor pursuit, smuggling call, weather complication, officer down, line of duty. Tragic. Clean. Too clean, Ethan had realized later, but by then grief had hardened into silence, and silence had become habit. He turned the token over in his gloved hand. The backside carried a small stamped mark, Cliff Station B9. Shadow pressed closer, shoulder brushing Ethan's leg, reading the shift in him before any human could have. The dog's warmth cut through the cold seam opening in Ethan's chest. "Yeah," Ethan murmured, voice low in the ruined room. "I see it too." He scanned the ledger pages. Most entries were dull transfer notes, chain custody forms, damaged navigational instruments, seized equipment. Then, near the back, one name caught the light. Deputy Marshal Daniel Cole, his father. Beneath it, in smaller notation, one line. Temporary archive transfer B, 9 pending sealed review. No further explanation, no listed recovery. Just that. Thunder rolled across the harbor. Ethan closed the ledger slowly. Whoever broke in tonight had been looking for this, or for what it pointed to. They had missed it by inches. His radio buzzed again. Another unit asking for status. Ethan answered, voice flat and controlled. "Forced entry confirmed. No suspects on scene. I'm securing the interior." He did not mention the token, not yet. By the time he locked the station behind him again, the storm had deepened into full night. Water streamed off the brim of his jacket. Shadow leapt into the SUV and shook once, then settled, eyes never leaving Ethan as he climbed into the driver's seat. The brass token sat in Ethan's palm, warmer now from his hand but no less heavy. Cliff Station B9. There were only a handful of old military sites along that stretch of coast, most of them decommissioned, listening posts built into stone during years when governments trusted concrete more than diplomacy. One of them sat north of town beyond the collapsed switchback road, hidden in the basalt cliffs above the sea, forgotten by tourists, avoided by locals. Too unstable, they said. Ethan started the engine fully and stared through the rain at the black road ahead. A routine break-in had just opened a door 20 years sealed in his life. He could feel it. Not as a thought, as pressure. The same pressure he felt before a search warrant went bad, before a suspect bolted, before the first wrong answer in a story that had been rehearsed too carefully. Shadow leaned forward until his muzzle nearly touched Ethan's shoulder. Grounding. Present. Ready. Ethan exhaled once. "All right," he said softly. "Let's see what he died trying to keep." The cliff road had been officially closed for 6 years. The town had posted barriers and warning signs after a winter landslide took half the outer edge into the ocean. But Ethan knew the service trail that cut inland through wind-bent spruce and returned to the overlook above the old tunnel access. He had run it twice as a deputy when helping search for missing teenagers. No one went there willingly after dark. Tonight that suited him. Rain thinned to a hard mist as he parked near the trailhead. The sea below was invisible, but its force carried upward in deep impacts against rock. The world smelled of salt, wet earth, and cedar torn open by weather. Ethan checked his sidearm, clipped his flashlight to his vest, and fitted Shadow's working harness over the shepherd's shoulders. The dog stood motionless through the process, only the twitch of his ears betraying his alertness. The trail climbed sharply. Mud sucked at Ethan's boots. Roots glistened black in the beam of his light. Shadow moved ahead in disciplined arcs, never out of reach, stopping twice to scan behind them at sounds Ethan never fully caught. Branches scraped overhead. Somewhere farther inland, a loose sign banged rhythmically in the wind like a distant hammer. At the top, the land opened onto a cliff shelf, and there it was. A concrete face built directly into stone, half swallowed by ivy, and decades of salt. One steel access door remained, set back beneath a narrow overhang. No public markings, no lights, just a rusted Navy stencil almost erased by time. B9. Ethan stood very still. His father had been here, maybe not once, maybe often enough to die for what waited below. Shadow approached the door, nose close to the seam, then turned his head and looked back, not alarmed, just confirming. Ethan fitted the brass token into the recessed slot beside the handle. For a moment, nothing happened. Then there came a hard internal clunk, followed by a reluctant mechanical release, like something waking from a bad dream. The handle gave. The door opened inward 3 inches, exhaling cold air that smelled of metal, mildew, and old circuitry. Ethan drew the flashlight and entered with Shadow at heel. The tunnel beyond sloped down through reinforced concrete, narrow enough that the beam reached both walls at once. Old cable brackets ran overhead. Water dripped from a crack in the ceiling near the bend. The deeper they went, the more the storm outside vanished, until only the tunnel remained. The sound of boots, breath, dripping water, and Shadow's soft footfalls. At the bottom was a chamber larger than Ethan expected. Old listening equipment racks lined one wall, stripped of most electronics but still labeled with faded designation plates. A long operations table stood beneath dust-coated plexiglass. Shelves held binders sealed in yellowing evidence bags. On the far side, behind a chain-link cage, sat 4 locked archive cabinets and a marine locker bolted to the floor. This had not been a smuggler's cache. Not exactly. It had been an archive. Shadow moved through the room with remarkable care, nose crossing low drawers, corners, vents, then coming to a stop at the marine locker. He sat beside it, body tall and intent. Ethan crouched. The locker had no modern lock, just a simple keyed latch broken long ago and resecured with braided wire. Someone had wanted it closed, not inaccessible. He unwound the wire and lifted the lid. Inside were sealed tubes, audio tape canisters, 2 hard-copy maintenance logs, and a waterproof evidence pouch marked with an old county seal. Beneath them rested a manila envelope with 1 handwritten label. For whoever still asks the right question. Ethan stared at the line for a long time before opening it. Inside was a typed statement signed by 3 former civilian contractors, dates, oath line, witness notation, and in the center, the first clear fracture in the official story. Unauthorized discharge from subsea storage line resulted in toxic plume release into inner harbor approach. Instruction received to classify readings as equipment error pending private containment. Another page followed. Deputy Marshal Daniel Cole notified after worker illness cluster. Evidence retained due to anticipated suppression. Ethan's jaw locked so hard it hurt. He read every line twice. Shadow had drifted to the chamber entrance now, sitting where he could monitor both the corridor and Ethan. Silent communication. Guard and witness. The maintenance logs expanded the picture. There had been a defense contractor operating a coastal sensor program under cover of infrastructure upgrades. Materials were stored offshore and transferred through the old Navy access system. At some point, a line failed. Toxic leakage entered the harbor current. Initial readings spiked. Worker complaints emerged, headaches, skin burns, respiratory distress. The system should have been shut down and reported immediately. Instead, someone buried it. The sonar logs showed vessel positioning and nocturnal maintenance runs that should never have occurred. The testimony pages confirmed altered readings and falsified maintenance summaries. A final index referenced an external evidence chain held temporarily at Maritime Record Station pending review. That was why the record station had been hit. Not for the testimony alone, for the chain. Ethan sat back on his heels. The flashlight beam trembled slightly in his hand, the only outward sign of what moved through him. His father had not died chasing smugglers. He had stepped into a cover-up with private contractors, contaminated harbor water, sick workers, and enough official pressure to bend a town's memory into something easier to live with. Ethan closed his eyes once. He could remember his father's voice only in fragments now, coffee in the mornings, engine grease on his knuckles, the half-smile before he told Ethan to finish what he started. The details were small, ordinary things, but grief does strange work. It preserves the harmless pieces and hides the sharp ones until years later. When Ethan opened his eyes, the chamber looked different, not abandoned, held. His father had left a question behind, and somebody had spent 2 decades making sure nobody answered it. A faint scrape sounded from the tunnel above. Shadow was on his feet instantly, ears pinned forward, body angled toward the incline. Ethan killed the flashlight. Darkness slammed into the room. He listened. Another sound, subtle, not tunnel drip, not structural settling. Weight shifting against gravel near the entrance. Someone had followed them. Ethan's pulse steadied instead of rising. That was the old part of him, the disciplined part, the part that became colder as danger became clearer. He rested one hand on Shadow's shoulder. The dog trembled with contained readiness. Hold! The silhouette darkened the upper bend for half a second, then disappeared. Ethan waited, counting breaths. Whoever it was did not come down. Maybe they had seen enough. Maybe they wanted him to know he had been seen. Either way, the message was received. This archive was still alive in someone's calculations. He relit the flashlight, moved quickly, and photographed every page with his phone. Then he resealed the testimony, logs, and tapes into the evidence pouch. He did not take everything. Not yet. Stripping the chamber might alert the wrong people too fast, but he would not leave empty-handed either. He selected the core documents establishing contamination, suppression, and his father's involvement, then secured them inside a waterproof bag. Shadow maintained the entrance, gaze fixed upward until Ethan was ready. They left together. Outside, the storm had passed north, but the wind remained fierce. The ocean below the cliffs boomed against stone as if the coast itself disapproved of what had been buried in it. At the trailhead, Ethan paused before getting into the SUV. There was another vehicle parked 200 yards away, mostly obscured by trees. Dark sedan, no plates visible from this angle, empty now, not an accident. He memorized the shape, the position, the mud pattern around the tires. Shadow gave a low rumble, almost too soft to hear. "Yeah," Ethan said. Someone was already moving. Captain Maria Hayes listened without interrupting. Her office overlooked the county marina, though this morning all it showed was gray water and gulls skimming low under a colorless sky. Maria sat behind her desk with both forearms planted on the surface, fingers lightly interlaced, expression unreadable in the way Ethan had learned meant she was thinking hard. She was pragmatic by reputation and by design, mid-40s, precise, emotionally disciplined, rarely impressed by panic, and never ruled by it. But there was empathy in her, too, quiet and durable. Ethan trusted that more than warmth. Shadow lay against the wall near the door, head up, watching them both. Ethan finished laying out the photocopied pages, the token, and the photographs from the tunnel. Maria leaned back slowly. "You found this alone?" "With Shadow." Her eyes flicked once toward the dog. "Of course." She picked up the brass token, turned it once, and set it down with care. "You realize what this becomes if it's real?" "It is real." "I know." She held his gaze. "What I mean is what it becomes publicly." Ethan said nothing. Maria continued. "Private defense contractor, harbor contamination, suppressed evidence, possible false reporting to law enforcement, potential federal entanglement, old deaths reopened." She let the list settle. "And your father in the middle of it." The words landed with the dull weight of fact, not sympathy. Fact was better. "I need chain verification," Ethan said, "and I need to know who hit the record station." Maria nodded once. "You're getting both, but quietly. No broad internal email, no rumor trail. We keep this tight until the evidence can survive daylight." That was why Ethan had come to her first. Not because she would protect him, because she would protect process. She reached for her phone. "I'm bringing in Dr. Lena Moore. If there's archival contamination data and analog storage involved, I want forensic handling done right from the first minute." Lena Moore arrived an hour later, carrying 2 hard cases and the inward focus of someone whose mind was always already 3 layers deep into a problem. She was brilliant in the way that made some people defensive around her, but Ethan had never found that difficult. Lena did not perform intelligence. She simply inhabited it. Dark hair pulled back, pale face tired but alert, eyes taking in the room as if cataloging light, dust, fingerprints, and motive at once. She read the first testimony page and went still. "Who else has seen this?" "Us," Maria said. "And whoever broke into maritime records last night." Lena looked at Ethan. "Then you are already behind the people who wanted it gone." "I know." She set the page down carefully. "Good. That means you won't underestimate them." For the next 2 hours, she worked methodically, documenting paper stock, typeface consistency, signature aging, water damage patterning, ink spread, staple oxidation, chain break possibilities. She asked almost no unnecessary questions. When she did speak, it was exact. These are period consistent. The damage aligns with long-term salt air exposure, not recent fabrication. This seal impression predates current county embossing. The testimony pages appear typed on the same machine series. The file grouping looks preserved, not assembled later. By noon, she straightened and removed her gloves. I can't certify full authenticity without lab support and longer comparison work, she said, but nothing here reads false. If this is fabricated, it was fabricated decades ago by people with extraordinary patience. Maria almost smiled at that. Almost. Deputy Lucas Reed was brought in last. Young compared with the others, energetic without being careless, Lucas carried the kind of humor that surfaced mostly to keep tension from calcifying. But there was real competence underneath it. Ethan had seen that in the field. Lucas could talk like a rookie and still notice the tire tread everyone else stepped over. He entered, saw the room's mood, and immediately stopped smiling. "So," he said quietly, "this is not about broken windows." "No," Maria replied, "it is not." Lucas read in silence for several minutes, then looked at Ethan. "You think someone tailed you from the station to the tunnel?" "Yes." "You get a look?" "Vehicle, not a driver." Lucas nodded once. "I'll pull roadside cams and marina feeds near breakwater, then whatever traffic we can get on the north end." Maria pointed at him. "No broad requests, no chatter." "Understood." For the first time since leaving the tunnel, Ethan felt the shape of a team forming around the truth. Not a crowd, not noise, just the right people locked into function. Shadow seemed to feel it too. He rose, crossed the room, and sat beside Ethan's chair, pressing the solid length of his body lightly against Ethan's leg. Lena noticed. "He does that when you're carrying too much." Ethan glanced down at the shepherd. "He does that when he thinks I'm slower than I should be." Lucas gave a quiet breath of a laugh. "Honestly, fair." It eased the room for half a second. Then Maria returned them to the work. "We have 3 priorities," she said. 1. Preserve the evidence. 2. Identify present-day actors trying to retrieve or destroy it. 3. Determine the exposure scope before somebody turns this into a redevelopment issue and buries it under money again. "Redevelopment?" Ethan asked. Maria slid a folder across the desk. Harbor Renewal Initiative, Quiet Proposal, Luxury Marina Expansion, Warehouse Conversion, Transport Corridor Upgrade. One of the planning zones overlaps the inner harbor and cliff utility easements. Lena's eyes sharpened. "Of course it does." Maria nodded. "If an old contamination issue resurfaces, those deals stall or die." "And if the issue stays buried," Ethan said, "the project goes through." "Exactly." Lucas set his tablet on the desk and turned it toward them. A still image filled the screen. Dark sedan, partial side view, captured in rain at an intersection 2 blocks from the record station. "Found your ghost car," he said. "Plates obscured, but the make tracks to a fleet lease. Shell Corporation, registered out of Seattle. Guess who sits behind the ownership chain?" He tapped twice. A defense infrastructure firm appeared on the screen, current name polished and bland, the kind designed to sound public-minded and forgettable. But buried in the parent company history was the thread Lena had already suspected, a successor entity to the contractor named in the archived logs. The room went silent, not old history then, not just dead paper. The same interests had changed suits, logos, and letterheads, but not instincts. Maria closed the folder. "From this point forward, assume surveillance." Lucas nodded. Lena nodded. Ethan did not move, but something in him set harder. This was no longer about what his father had died trying to expose. It was also about what living people still wanted hidden. Maria stood. "Ethan, you and Shadow go back to B9 tonight with Lena and Lucas. Full evidence sweep. You do not separate. You document every inch. If anyone approaches, you disengage with the evidence. You are not heroes in a tunnel." Lucas gave a small look at Ethan. "Pretty sure he hates when people say that." "I do," Ethan replied. Maria's tone softened by a degree. "Good. Stay alive anyway." They returned to the cliffs after sunset. The weather had cleared enough to leave the stars exposed in hard white fragments over the sea, but the wind remained bitter, carrying salt spray high enough to dampen the trail stones. Lucas hauled the equipment case with a muttered complaint about engineers who apparently hated wheels. Lena ignored him and kept moving. Shadow ranged ahead and back, checking them all, the living metronome of the team. Whenever Lucas drifted too close to the cliff edge while juggling gear, Shadow physically bumped his thigh and herded him inwards without breaking stride. "Okay," Lucas muttered to the dog, "that's humiliatingly helpful." At the bunker door, Ethan stopped and listened. No movement, no light leak, no scent of fresh smoke or oil, just stone, salt, old metal. The token turned. The door opened. Inside, the tunnel felt colder than the night above. Their lights cut clean tunnels through the dark as they descended. Lena's breathing remained steady. Lucas talked less the deeper they went. Ethan could feel the old pressure returning, the sense of entering a place where truth had been stored not for convenience, but for survival. In the chamber, Lena began immediately. She photographed everything before touching it. Rack labels, cable runs, dust patterns, corrosion points, cabinet hinges, old transfer crates, the floor itself. Lucas logged timestamps and item coordinates. Ethan secured the perimeter, moving only when Lena needed an object lifted or stabilized. Shadow searched methodically, nose tracing seams of cabinets and wall junctions, then circling back to Ethan. When Lena opened one of the locked archive cabinets, more records emerged. Maintenance manifests, harbor approach schematics, vessel access schedules, contractor staffing rosters. Not dramatic in isolation, powerful in sequence. "They didn't just suppress a leak," Lena said quietly. "They managed the whole narrative around it." Lucas looked up from his notes. "Meaning?" "Meaning contamination is one crime. Controlled ignorance is another." The words stayed with Ethan. Controlled ignorance. That was exactly what the town had lived on for years. Just enough explanation to stop questions. Just enough official language to replace grief with procedure. At the back of the second cabinet, behind shipping binders, Ethan found a sealed photograph envelope. He opened it with gloved fingers. Inside were harbor surveillance stills taken on grainy long-lens equipment. Night shots, dock access, maintenance barge, worker clusters near the restricted pier. In the last photograph, his father stood near a loading ramp, profile turned toward the camera, one arm extended as if blocking someone from advancing. Across from him, half caught in motion blur, was a suited man with his face partly visible beneath dock lights. Lena stepped closer. "Can you zoom that?" Ethan handed her the image. She photographed it for enhancement. Lucas leaned in. "No way." "What?" Ethan asked. Lucas pointed. "That guy, I know that face." "From where?" "Not personally," Lucas swallowed. "Planning board packets, harbor renewal presentations. He's older now, but I've seen him." Lena looked from the photo to Lucas. "Name?" Lucas exhaled. "Graham Voss, consultant, regional infrastructure advisor." Maria's redevelopment file flashed through Ethan's mind. Not history, continuity. The cover-up had matured into civic language. Before anyone spoke again, Shadow's head snapped toward the tunnel. He froze. Every line of him changed. Ethan knew that stillness better than most human expressions. It meant real threat, not uncertainty. "Lights off," Ethan said. Darkness dropped around them. For 2 breaths, there was nothing. Then a faint metallic tap echoed from the incline above. Not footsteps. Something placed. Lena whispered, "What is that?" Ethan drew his sidearm, one hand resting against Shadow's shoulder to hold him back. Lucas shifted beside the equipment cases, breathing shallow now. A second sound came, then a rolling clatter descending the concrete slope. Ethan moved before thought finished forming. "Down!" He drove Lena behind the operations table as Lucas hit the floor. A cylindrical object bounced once into the chamber and burst in a violent cloud of white chemical smoke. Not explosive, disorientation. Shadow barked once, furious and sharp. Ethan dragged his sleeve over his nose and lunged toward the tunnel mouth, but he stopped 3 strides in. Through the smoke he heard running above, not descending, retreating. Whoever had thrown it in wanted them blinded and disrupted, maybe long enough to grab something if panic broke the room apart. It didn't. "Evidence first!" Ethan shouted. Lena, coughing, shoved the primary documents back into the waterproof case. Lucas sealed the photo packets and tapes. Shadow held the corridor, hacking once from the smoke, but refusing to yield ground. Within seconds, Ethan made the call. "Out, now!" They moved as a unit, low and fast, through the stinging haze and up the tunnel incline. By the time they burst into open night, the bluff above was empty. No visible suspect, no vehicle lights, only the black sea and the shriek of wind across stone. Lucas bent double, coughing. That was not random. "No," Ethan said. Lena wiped at her eyes, furious now more than shaken. They knew exactly when to hit. Shadow strained toward the upper trail, nose working furiously. Ethan followed the dog 30 yards inland and found fresh boot marks crossing the muddy edge of the service path toward the old maintenance road. Beside them, tire impressions, utility vehicle, narrow wheelbase, fast exit. He photographed everything. When they returned to the trailhead parking area, Lucas stopped at Ethan's SUV and stared. A single envelope had been tucked beneath the driver's side wiper. No stamp, no address, just plain white paper already dampening in the night air. Ethan opened it. Inside was one typed sentence. "Your father chose badly. You still have time." Lucas swore under his breath. Lena went very still. Shadow stood pressed against Ethan's leg, gaze fixed into the dark trees as if expecting their watchers to step forward and finally become visible. But they did not. That was the point. Pressure without face. Threat without ownership. Fear offered as an administrative convenience. Ethan folded the note once and put it in his jacket. Something inside him should have broken open then, anger, grief, shock. Instead, he felt only a colder clarity. His father had not chosen badly. His father had chosen a line. Now the same line ran straight through Ethan. Publicly, the next week looked ordinary. Fishing boats still left before dawn. School traffic still jammed Harbor Avenue for 20 minutes each morning. Cafes still served burnt coffee to dock crews and retirees and planning consultants talking about revitalization. But under that normal surface, pressure moved fast. The county received a quiet request from a private legal firm seeking emergency review of the structural hazard posed by cliff access site B9. A separate state inquiry asked whether the tunnel chamber contained undocumented hazardous materials requiring immediate sealing. The Harbor Redevelopment Committee advanced its agenda unexpectedly, trying to move the next public hearing up by nearly a month. Every move pointed the same way: close access, control the narrative, outpace disclosure. Maria tracked it all with clinical calm. "They're trying to turn a truth problem into a safety management problem," she told Ethan in briefing. "If they can frame B9 as unstable, contaminated, or procedurally invalid, the evidence becomes harder to reach, easier to challenge." Lena spread enhanced images across the table. One showed the suited man from the dock photo with much sharper facial detail. Age had changed him since, but the structure remained unmistakable. Graham Voss, current consultant, former company liaison by another name. Lucas added another layer. Phone records from public directories, corporate filings, planning committee emails, lease registrations. Voss is everywhere you'd want him to be if you needed the old mess to stay buried and the new redevelopment money to stay alive. "Can you put him in B9?" Ethan asked. "No, not directly." "Can you put people tied to him there?" Lucas tapped a screen. "Shell Fleet Lease puts 2 vehicles in the county the week of the break-in. One of them matches the sedan near the trailhead. The lease chain terminates at a subcontractor whose board counsel overlaps with Voss's consulting group." Maria nodded once. Enough to investigate, not enough to win publicly by itself. Which meant the hearing mattered. A lot. It was Lena who found the final hinge. Buried inside the maintenance binders was a calibration discrepancy between the official harbor toxicity readings and the internal raw intake logs. On its own it looked technical, dry, forgettable. But when paired with the testimony, the night photos, the vessel schedules, and the redevelopment overlap, it became proof of deliberate alteration. Not accident, not confusion, manipulation. Lena stood over the table, one hand braced on the file, voice low with contained intensity. "This is the chain. This is where they lose deniability." Maria asked, "Can you explain it to civilians?" Lena almost smiled. "I can explain it to hostile civilians." Lucas muttered, "Now that I'd pay to see." Shadow, lying at Ethan's boots, lifted his head at the shift in mood. Ethan rested a hand on the back of the dog's neck and looked across the table at the people assembled there. Maria, leadership without vanity. Lena, precision sharpened into force. Lucas, motion, reach, connective tissue. Shadow, instinct, loyalty, silent certainty. And Ethan at the center of it, whether he wanted that role or not. He thought of his father again, but now not as absence, as direction. Major turn. He had not known that phrase in real life, only in stories, but life had one all the same. The instant when the old explanation dies and you can no longer go back to living inside it. His father had not died in a random harbor pursuit. He had died holding the last intact chain of evidence against people powerful enough to rewrite memory. Ethan felt that truth settle fully at last, not just into thought, but into identity. Grief changed shape in him. Less wound now, more responsibility. Maria broke the silence. Emergency hearing is set for Thursday night. County oversight, environmental review, public redevelopment impact. They think they can contain this in procedure. Ethan looked up. Can we? Maria's eyes did not leave his. We can survive procedure. That's not the same thing as winning it. Then we make the truth harder to move than they are. A flicker of approval crossed her face. That afternoon, Ethan drove to the waterfront alone with Shadow. Not because he had to, because he needed to stand where his father had once stood and see the harbor as it was meant to be seen. Not through rumor, not through a death notice, not through 20 years of softened civic memory. The docks smelled of diesel, fish scales, wet rope, and cold iron. Men unloaded crates under gull cries and crane squeals. Families crossed the boardwalk, bundled in jackets. Teenagers laughed too loudly outside the bait shop. Life everywhere, ordinary and fragile and unprotected against hidden decisions made far above it. Shadow walked at Ethan's knee without command, matching his speed. At the end of the pier, Ethan stopped. Gray water moved beneath him in small, hard chop. Beyond the inner markers, the ocean widened toward weather and distance. He imagined toxic runoff touching these currents years ago while officials discussed optics and delay language and liability exposure. Workers got sick. People were told half-truths. His father pulled at the thread and died before he could unravel it. Shadow leaned into him once, firm and quiet. I know, Ethan said. He looked down at the dog. Shadow's muzzle had just begun to show faint silver near the chin, a sign age was approaching, but not yet winning. His eyes remained bright, direct, and unwavering. No one else in Ethan's life had ever understood silence the way Shadow did. No demand, no awkward attempt to fix what could not be fixed. Just presence, absolute and disciplined. Tactical synergy, yes. More than that, too. At the far end of the marina lot, a black SUV idled for 10 seconds too long before pulling away. Ethan watched it go. Pressure, always pressure. He no longer felt hunted by it. He felt instructed. The hearing was held in the old Netmenders Union Hall because it was the only public building large enough on short notice. By 6:30, every folding chair was filled. Harbor families, fishermen, city staff, retirees, planning advocates, reporters from 2 regional papers. Men in clean, expensive jackets pretending to be ordinary stakeholders. Women with notebooks and sharp eyes. A hum of expectation hung under the fluorescent lights like static. At the front table sat county review officials and a state environmental moderator. Beside them, sleek and composed, sat Graham Voss. He had aged well in the particular way wealth allows. Silver at the temples, excellent suit, tailored calm. But when Ethan saw his face in full, lit and undeniable, the photograph from the archive aligned perfectly in his mind. Same man, older mask. Voss caught Ethan's gaze from across the hall and offered the faintest professional nod, as though they were 2 men meeting over zoning disagreement rather than the grave of a buried crime. Shadow's lips barely lifted from his teeth. No sound. Just message. Ethan rested a hand on the dog's shoulder until the shepherd settled again, though his stare never left Voss. Maria opened with procedure, brief, controlled, unadorned. Then Lena took the floor. Her presentation was not dramatic, but the effect was devastating precisely because of that. She walked the room through the chain in disciplined sequence: archival origin, maintenance records, internal raw data, testimony pages, photographic corroboration, contractor lineage, redevelopment overlap, and the specific calibration discrepancy proving the official environmental readings had been manipulated. Slides changed behind her, Clean diagrams, dates, highlighted inconsistencies, vessel paths across the harbor mouth, material handling locations, illness reports stripped of names but not numbers. "We are not dealing with rumor," Lena said, voice carrying clear to the back wall. "We are dealing with preserved records that align across independent document types and time. The significance is not merely historical. The redevelopment proposals before this county intersect with a contamination event whose suppression appears deliberate." The room changed then. People stopped shifting in their seats, stopped checking phones, stopped breathing like this was an ordinary public meeting. Voss remained composed, but Ethan saw the tiny tell at his jawline. Lena saw it too, though she gave no sign. When her portion ended, Maria entered the recovered photo of Voss's younger self at the dock, and the audience murmured openly. A planning commissioner asked for relevance. Maria provided it in one sentence. "Because the man now advising renewal of the same harbor footprint appears materially linked to the suppressed event." Then it was Ethan's turn. He had not wanted a speech. Maria knew better than to ask him for one. She only asked for a truth in order. He stood with Shadow beside him and faced the room. The hall looked larger from the front, harder, full of faces waiting to decide whether they believed procedure or the man standing under it. Ethan set the brass token on the evidence table where everyone could see it. "My father," he said, and the room quieted in a way that felt almost physical, "was Deputy Marshal Daniel Cole. Most of this town was told he died in a harbor pursuit. That story has lived here a long time because it was simple, and simple stories are easy to keep." He let that settle. "I found this token in a hidden compartment inside an evidence ledger after someone broke into the maritime record station during a storm. That token opened archive site B9. Inside were preserved records, testimony, logs, and photographs connecting my father to an evidence chain tied to harbor contamination and its suppression." He did not raise his voice. He did not perform grief. He simply continued, step by deliberate step, describing the break-in, the tunnel, the attempt to disrupt recovery, the threat note left on his vehicle, the efforts to close access before public review. Shadow stood motionless at his left side, ears up, body like a carved line of dark muscle and intent. A woman in the third row began crying quietly before Ethan finished. An older harbor mechanic removed his cap and held it against his chest without seeming to realize he had done it. Then came Voss. He rose with polished regret in his face and the smooth cadence of a man accustomed to turning damage into ambiguity. "These allegations are emotionally resonant," he began, "but they are built on recovered materials from a compromise site, decades old, outside continuous chain custody, interpreted under current political pressure." Lena cut in before the moderator could even decide whether to intervene. "That is false." Voss turned, still smiling. "Dr. Moore, with respect—" "With data," Lena replied, "not respect." A ripple went through the room. She approached the board again, called up the split-screen comparison of raw intake logs against the official filed readings, and dismantled his argument point by point. Not with outrage, with precision. The kind that leaves nowhere to stand. Lucas followed with fleet registration records, subcontractor ties, site proximity timelines, and a clipped, surprisingly effective account of the smoke device interference at B9. He was nervous at first. Ethan could hear it. Then he found rhythm. "I'm not here to be dramatic," Lucas said. "I'm here because people who had no good reason to be near that site were near it, and because someone with resources has spent a lot of effort acting like there's nothing there." The room was with him by then. Maria brought it home. She spoke of duty, evidence preservation, and the legal obligation to suspend all redevelopment action affecting the harbor corridor until independent federal and state review could be completed. Her voice never sharpened. It didn't need to. Voss made one final attempt. "Captain Hayes, surely you understand the economic damage caused by reckless speculation?" Maria turned to face him fully. "I understand," she said, "the damage caused when men with influence decide the public can survive not knowing what endangered them." Silence. Absolute silence. Then, from the back of the hall, someone began clapping. Not celebratory, resolute. Another joined, then another. It spread unevenly but unmistakably, not for theater, but because a room full of ordinary people had just felt the machinery of concealment lose its grip by inches. The moderator called for order. Order returned slowly. By the end of the night, the board entered an emergency motion: immediate suspension of harbor redevelopment approvals within the affected corridor, protective status for archive site B9 pending state and federal investigation, and formal referral of the recovered record set for external review. Voss left before the final language was even read aloud. Ethan watched him go, expressionless. Shadow tracked him until the door shut. The fight was not over. Ethan knew that. Formal investigation meant lawyers, denials, delays, technical warfare, maybe years of it. But something essential had happened in that hall. The truth had survived public contact. It would not be easy to bury again. The harbor changed slowly after that. Not in dramatic ways. No miraculous sunrise, no instant justice. Real outcomes rarely arrive that clean. Investigators came, samples were retaken. Federal archivists cataloged B9. Journalists found old worker families and began asking new questions. Planning committees canceled meetings pending review. Men who had once spoken confidently about economic momentum suddenly preferred written statements through counsel. The town itself adjusted like an old ship correcting course. Some people were angry, not at Ethan exactly, but at the disturbance of long, stable stories. Others thanked him with awkward handshakes outside the grocery store or silent nods on the docks. A few told him about illnesses they had never understood, jobs lost, rumors half heard and swallowed because the alternative had seemed too big to fight. Maria remained steady at the center of official chaos. Lena spent long days in labs and longer evenings parsing new material from the archive. Lucas became, to his own surprise, very good at handling reporters without saying anything useful by accident. And Ethan kept returning to the cliffs, sometimes with work, sometimes only with Shadow. The tunnel no longer felt like a tomb when he entered it. It felt like custody, a place where truth had endured pressure until the right hands were ready to carry it forward. One late afternoon, weeks after the hearing, Ethan stood at the cliff overlook with the sea below him shining cold silver under a break in the clouds. Spring had begun pushing green into the coastal brush. Gulls wheeled in the wind. Somewhere down in town, cranes moved at the docks and engines turned over, and life kept choosing itself again. Shadow sat beside him, chest broad, ears up, gaze on the horizon. "You knew before I did," Ethan said. Shadow glanced at him once, then back to the water. Ethan smiled faintly. "Yeah, that tracks." Footsteps sounded behind them, not urgent, familiar. Maria approached first, coat collar up against the wind. Lena followed with a folder under one arm. Lucas came last, carrying paper cups of coffee and looking offended by the existence of hills. "I brought peace offerings," Lucas announced, handing drinks around. He crouched to give Shadow a respectful scratch under the collar, and one for the only truly reliable member of this unit. Shadow accepted the attention with dignified tolerance. Lena opened the folder. "Preliminary federal memo. Protective designation on B9 is holding. Harbor remediation zone likely expands. Full redevelopment freeze remains in place." Maria looked out at the water. "It's enough for now." Ethan took that in. Enough for now. Not victory speeches, not absolutes. Just a line held, the kind that matters. He thought of his father then, not as a man lost inside the wrong story, but as someone who had done what his code required and paid for it. The grief remained. Maybe it always would. But it no longer felt directionless. It belonged to something completed and still continuing. Lena closed the folder. "You could leave, you know." Ethan looked at her. "The town," she said. "The noise, the politics, the aftermath." Maria said nothing, but the question hung there. Ethan turned toward the harbor below, the working water, the streets, the archive site, the place that had once felt like unfinished damage and now felt somehow like assignment. "I know," he said. "I'm not going to." Lucas blew on his coffee. "Cool, because honestly, the paperwork learning curve on replacing you seems terrible." Maria gave him a dry look. "That is not the reason. It's one of them." Even Lena smiled at that. Shadow rose and moved closer until his shoulder pressed against Ethan's leg, firm and grounded as ever. Not needy, never needy, just there. Tactical synergy, emotional ballast, silent loyalty, the living proof that trust does not need explanation to be real. The wind lifted again, colder off the open water. Ethan placed a hand on Shadow's back and looked toward the cliffs where the hidden tunnel waited, no longer hidden in the same way. Once it had been a vault for suppressed evidence. Now it was protected ground. Once the harbor had been a place his father died in a lie. Now it was a place the truth had begun to return to. And Ethan, who had spent so much of his life moving from duty to duty without belonging fully anywhere, felt something unfamiliar settle into him at last. Not closure, something stronger, choice. He had not inherited safety. He had inherited unfinished responsibility. He had accepted it, carried it, put it into the light with the people and the dog who had made that possible. Below them, the tide turned. It did not happen dramatically, just a subtle change in current, almost invisible until you watched closely enough. Like truth, like grief, like legacy, like the quiet moment a man stops running from what shaped him and decides to stand where it matters. Ethan watched the water shift and felt Shadow steady at his side. The future did not look easy. It looked earned, and for the first time in a very long while, that was enough.